Hi, you're watching India Post Live, India's first web TV news conversation. I'm Shivraj, and today we're discussing India's Afghanistan policy. You can also log into the conversation by logging on to www.indiapostlive.com. You can also write in by tweeting with us, #IndiaPostLive. Right, so President Hamid Karzai was here for the swearing-in ceremony of Narendra Modi, and with him came a list of demands that Afghanistan would like India to step in and help the country as the US begins its withdrawal from the country. So what is India's position, especially the new government's position, on Afghanistan? Let's take a look.
When Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai attended Indian PM Narendra Modi's oath-taking ceremony, he brought an impressive wish list: battle tanks, field guns, trucks and military choppers. But that's just half the picture. Indians continue to be vulnerable targets in Karzai's war-torn country. Several Indian diplomats have been targeted by militants in recent years, the last one being as recent as 23rd May, when the Indian consulate in Herat province was attacked by heavily armed insurgents. The kidnapping of Indian Director of Jesuit Refugee Services has not helped matters. But will India and Afghanistan be able to thwart the tentacles of terror in the region? With the US all set to pull out its troops from Afghanistan, Modi will have to do the balancing act between helping the country rebuild its economy and safeguarding the interests of Indians posted in Afghanistan.
So joining us in that conversation is General HASNAIN, who's a former Commander Kashmir. Pratap Chakravarty, who's with the South Africa Broadcasting Corporation, has also been in Afghanistan in various avatars as well. And joining us also via Google Hangout is Rahul BHONSLE, Director, Asian Risk and Knowledge Management Agency. General Sen, I think the first thing that's really happened is that the current government, before it even came in, was put on the mat with the incidents that happened in Herat. And we've seen how the current External Affairs Minister, Sushma Swaraj, personally took on the mission to also rescue that one Indian who was there working in the aid area who'd been kidnapped in Herat. So clearly, the government's got a lot on its hands when it comes to Afghanistan.
No doubt about that, and the fact remains that Afghanistan for us remains a very, very important country. Having said that, obviously in the last couple of days, just around the time of the swearing-in ceremony in Delhi, a very strong message perhaps emanated from within Afghanistan from the radical elements. What Mr. Karzai himself said was that it probably was due to the Lashkar-e-Toiba, the involvement of the Lashkar-e-Toiba themselves, which led to this incident in Herat. Now, this is obviously a very awkward start, and it was expected to try and put India on the map. But I'm glad that I think a very strong message was sent across on the very first day itself, wherein a joint kind of an operation between the ITBP, an excellent operation between the ITBP and the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police, managed to get rid of the terrorists without a single casualty. Notwithstanding, having said that, and notwithstanding that particular incident, I think a lot has to be done. A lot has to be done with Afghanistan. We are looking at a stage where the ISAF is going to draw down. They're going to have only 9,600 troops left for the next 2 years or so. We've invested a lot of money in Afghanistan, and we have a lot of stakes involved in the security of Afghanistan. So I'm sure the government has got its hands full, definitely, but I think it's a very good beginning.
And Pratap, I think there's always been this instance of attrition. Each time there's an incident, everyone's sort of thrown into a sort of a bind. We've seen a transition now in government. You will see now presidential elections, everything changing in Afghanistan. What impact do you think it will have on the thinking here in Delhi?
See, I'll rather put it like this. I'll go slightly deeper and wider, a bit historical. Since 2003, 37 Indians have been killed in Afghanistan, and there have been 4 kidnappings, including that of Alexis in Herat. There also have been 2 attacks within an embassy in 2008 and 2009, which killed 88 people, and including 2 diplomats. Now, then we had the Serena hotel attacks. Now, the question now that comes to anybody's mind, does India have the stomach to take this kind of collateral damage after having invested $2 billion in Afghanistan? Hamid Karzai came to India. This was his 5th visit in 3 years, and he did go beyond the SPA, the Strategic Partnership Agreement of 2011. which was further refurbished in a year later, asking for tanks and this and that. But then when he went back, he made a comment that India is shy of giving it. Now the question is, the heart of heart, both India and Afghanistan, Kabul and New Delhi rather, know that they cannot stretch the envelope because that will step on Pakistani sensitivities, and they have to work within the given limited thing. India has three main broad interests in Afghanistan, and India will have to work in that, whether it is having collateral damage or not. A being, of course, the preservation of sovereignty and integrity of Afghanistan. B is to preserve it from external and militant forces. And C, have a broader economic framework for which India is working with Iran, US on a $10.8 billion package. This is excluding the $2 billion India has spent. So India's, I'd rather put it like this, Modi's government has to take into these parameters in place and see what it can go, how it can go about it.
So Rahul, just coming to you, I think, Pakistani sensitivities, the fact that this government is settling in and was already on the map, but Pakistan will always remain a huge factor when it comes to the Afghanistan policy because it is seen as a theater for radical elements and Kashmiri militants to sort of play out their proxy war against Indian institutions and Indian presence there as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, the message which was given by the present government by calling all the SAARC leaders together in Delhi, what was the message? It was a message that India is going to be a regional power, I would say, or a regional, it would be a regional pivot. Power will be a strong, it's going to be a regional pivot. Now, that's a very, sensitive issue as a whole, apart from Afghanistan. That's a very sensitive issue as far as the Pakistan military and the ISI is concerned. Now, they have to counter this Indian challenge of being one of the pivots and this pivot thing is not my combination. The pivot is a combination by the international community at large. Now, how do they have to then combine this challenge to the pivot with the in Afghanistan? They find a very good instrument which they have developed over the past many years. And despite, I think, India's strong efforts to sort of neutralize it, the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Now today, the Lashkar-e-Taiba is one of the strong forces which is operating in Afghanistan. 2 days back, there was an attack on the convoy of Mr. Abdullah, who is the presidential candidate. And some people in Afghanistan say it was carried out by Lashkar-e-Taiba. So it is, Lashkar-e-Taiba has got now interest, it had interest in sort of creating instability or creating, not instability rather, but carrying out these terrorist attacks in India, but it is starting to get larger interest. So I think Pakistan is trying to sort of structure its entire strategy, vis-a-vis India and Afghanistan, trying to have a synergy between the two and using the instrument of terror to sort of combat the same in a very, very synergized fashion, which is, I think, what the new government will have to understand and try to unravel this complete strategy and try to evolve a plan and evolve focus so that we are able to achieve our regional objectives, achieve our bilateral objectives, which are, of course, peace and stability in the Indian subcontinent as such.
Okay, also joining us in the conversation is Surya Gangadharan, a security expert. Now, Surya, speaking to Pakistani officials, and you've said this before, I think even for Pakistan, it's a big poser because they'd be talking about Afghanistan, the radical elements, and not being able to control them. How verifiable is that on the ground?
You see, the point is we have seen an attack on Karachi airport, and clearly these are groups that are Pakistani intelligence establishment, some of which are not. It's still not clear how much of control the Pakistani military actually exercises over some of these groups. And it would seem that there's been an element of infiltration within the Pakistani military of groups like the Tehreek-e-Taliban. And there's also groups like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, Lashkar-e-Taiba that have infiltrated some of the Pakistani Punjabi soldiery. So clearly there is this specter of disintegration that the Pak Army does face, which is probably why the Pakistani brass is so careful about how they go about these things. They have been pressing.
All right. We've also got joining us in, because we seem to be having a few problems, by Rajeshwari Krishnamurthy, who's research officer at IPCS, or the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. Rajeshwari, the Modi government made it very clear that it wants a establish leadership in the SAARC region, Afghanistan being the larger focus as well. Given the past incidents... Okay, so I think the other question is that with the United States, and you alluded to this, withdrawing in a phased manner from 14 to 16 completely, there are fears that the vacuum that gets left behind could also revert to a situation of 1989 as well, when the Soviets left.
Oh, well, that is very true, and a lot of strategic analysts are thinking about that at the moment. But let's look at it primarily from an angle of its effect on India and Indian security.
Right.
I don't think 1989 and 2014 are really comparable. 1989 to 1991, you saw a tumultuous period in India's history when you found the Kashmir problem coming up, and you found the incursion of a large number of foreign mercenaries who were suddenly jobless in Afghanistan coming in, and a tremendous amount of weaponry coming along with them. Now, since 1989 to 2014, 25 years, I think the Indian security forces have moved on far beyond. Today, you have the Russian rifles, you have the LOC fence, you have surveillance devices and systems by themselves which will prevent this infiltration. But having said that, there will be attempts to try and make incursions into Kashmir from different areas. It's not just the LOC alone. It can happen from Bangladesh, it can happen from Nepal, as we are aware. So we are, I think, fairly well prepared for that, and a repeat of 1989 is very, very unlikely.
And I think the difference is that the Indian government over the last few years has also been providing a lot of on-ground support to the Afghan National Army.
Absolutely.
In terms of training, in terms of infrastructure as well.
Absolutely. That is very true. In fact, we seem to be one of the main supporters of this entire thing towards strengthening the Afghan National Army. I think it's a fairly large and reasonably well-trained army, and for the last 2 years, they've been operating almost independently. Their major weakness perhaps lies in the fact that they are very good at counter-terrorist operations. How good are they at actually handling a counter-insurgency situation, which will probably manifest itself as the ISAF continues its drawdown? That is questionable. And they have got a large shopping list of weaponry and equipment and things like that, which the world seems to be a little reluctant to provide to them. And they have come to India for it. And in India, for the Indian government, it's going to be a very major decision.
But post 9/11, India did feel a little left out of the equation. The Western powers moved into Afghanistan, sort of factored the India angle out completely. I think this is an opportunity as well.
Well, definitely, there is. But you see, in 2001, when it happened post 9/11, you got to remember that Pakistan, perhaps, you may say, is blessed or not blessed to have the kind of geostrategic position that it has got. It was the launch pad. It is from there that everything had to happen in Afghanistan. Times have moved on, and India has played its very valid role in Afghanistan since then, and primarily with the soft power. So I think our stakes are very high, and we will continue perhaps playing a very, very important role in the future of Afghanistan even after the ISAF have left.
So Pratap, generally alluded to soft power. I think there's a lot of goodwill in Afghanistan when it comes vis-a-vis India, and I think India's also thrown its weight behind at international fora, the $2 billion pledge, the infrastructure. Has that gone a long way when you go to Afghanistan to change the perception of how much India can play a role in bringing stability to that country?
See, I will put it like this. First of all, the first player in Afghanistan is Pakistan.
Right.
India has been desperate to get a diplomatic and a political toehold. And now India slightly broadened its approach to Afghanistan on its Look East policy, where it wants economic play starting from Dhaka to Colombo to westward in Maldives and Afghanistan through Iran. But now everything hinges on what Pakistan does, because geographically and culturally they are very much integrated. Now, Pakistan, it's good to bash Pakistan in India because they do bashing there of India. Pakistan has burned its fingers in Afghanistan in a very vital way, and in a tactical way. When the Soviets left, it was we used to see it ourselves in Turkham border. They changed the uniform, the Pakistani army come into, before the Soviets left. After the Soviets left, when Najibullah regime was there, and they will fire the Sakar missiles at towns and cities. Now, when the Najibullah was gone, thanks to the UN's manipulation, when the Mujahideen came in, the Pakistani army's influence diminished. They would have advisors instead of combat troops on the ground. And when the Taliban came, they said bye-bye to the Pakistanis. Now, Pakistan, does it want to leave a vacuum for a radical element to fill that vacuum? I seriously doubt it. That's why there's a lot of talk about the good Taliban and the bad Taliban. So India need not worry too much about what Pakistan would do. Pakistan does also as
and it
India.
made that clear, that let Pakistan have its own equation, but India wants to go in independently and create that.
Pakistan did make a mistake of fermenting radicalism among the 5 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan at the height of the Soviet invasion.
And it's coming back to bite them.
And it came back to bite them. And now, vis-a-vis Afghanistan, the same Pakistan, or what the dispensation is there now, they have learned their lesson very badly, and I've been talking to many of them, and they will not allow this kind of radicalism to take over. And that's why India is also asking some kind of a international assurance of stability there, and so does Pakistan, for a change.
Surya, what is the word in North and South Bloc, especially South Bloc, when it comes to the whole list that Ahmed Karzai came with? Of course, it's a bit early because the government's still settling in. But what's the thinking amongst South Bloc on the issue of providing Afghanistan with more infrastructure beyond just basic arms on the ground?
Well, within the Ministry of Defense, I think it's fairly clear that we don't produce enough or have enough for our own requirements to be able to supply Afghanistan with the kind of quantities and numbers that they want. So clearly that also explains the arrangement with Russia and Afghanistan, where we pay for some of the equipment that the Afghans will procure from the Russians. So that's one aspect of it. But I think we also need to be forthright about where our interests are, and what we want, rather than constantly look at, be worried about what the Pakistanis are thinking, their sensitivities. Because at the end of the day, they will do exactly what they want against us. And whether we give the Afghans directly or otherwise, they'll still go out on a limb to hit us. That's how they are. With the Americans, well, they are pulling out by 2016 completely. And we need to get our act together before that, because this residual American troop presence of around 9,000 or 10,000 troops, they're not going to be there except to defend American bases and other installations. So we need to get our act together there, be more forthright and transparent about what our interests in Afghanistan are, and perhaps even do a dialogue with the Pakis on this, assuming, of course, they're interested in such a dialogue.
And also, Surya, I guess, when you're talking about interests, India's also gone in there with a lot of backing a lot of iron ore and mining and other interests as well, beyond just the aid. So I would imagine this government would have to look at safeguarding those interests as well, and in the long term, looking at how they can build, along with Afghanistan, the infrastructure they'll be talking about.
And that all depends on security. Even the Chinese have got huge mining concessions. They haven't started any work there. Nor have we, because there's no security there. And how are you going to do this? Do you want to send in troops there to defend those kind of concessions? I mean, these are some of the questions that we are talking to the Chinese about during the dialogue we have in Afghanistan. So these are tricky issues, they involve sovereignty issues and all that. We'll have to wait for the new government to come in. Abdullah is a friend. I'm sure he's keen on getting these things moving because it requires Afghanistan needs money. But security remains the main issue there, and there needs to be a kind of a regional kind of attempt to try and get around these issues and resolve them, in a joint manner rather than piecemeal, each nation acting according to its own interests.
Right. And General, what about the countries around Afghanistan, like Tajikistan and countries like that India is engaging with on the issue? How effective have those trilateral or those different fora level dialogues been on looking at what Surya pointed out, the issue of security of Indian interests in that region?
Well, obviously, you have to see the entire matrix. You've got to see the region instead of just focusing on Afghanistan itself. There's Iran on the other side, there's Pakistan. In the north, there is Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. So you've got to see the entire matrix put together. Well, we've had a fairly good working relationship with Tajikistan, and lots of things are ongoing with them in the military field. In fact, this military diplomacy working extremely well with them, which is being converted into political diplomacy subsequently. And Tajikistan itself has got huge stakes here. If in the long term, if we got to look at Afghanistan's security, we've also got to see the economic aspects.
Right.
And as you yourself just mentioned, the aspects of the mineral deposits, the access routes for the pipelines and the infrastructure coming down into the Indian Ocean, all this will add to the overall economic security of Afghanistan, because at some stage or the other, finances are going to run out. You see, the tap which is there at the moment, with which a lot of money is coming in, will ultimately depend on what the security situation in Afghanistan is all about.
And also the world's purse strings have tightened.
Absolutely.
You know, with the European crisis, with America looking at its own domestic issues, Afghanistan is not going to be a priority.
Absolutely. And Surya brought out a very interesting aspect about China. Now, China has got huge interests there. Absolutely. You're aware. China's interests are in the minerals there itself, and work hasn't really commenced in a very big way yet, and in the infrastructure. Because after all, there's the new Silk Route which is coming up, there's the North-South infrastructure which is coming up. We have got our interest to be able to log on to that complete thing and link up with that infrastructure. And I think India and China are already engaged in discussions with each other on the manner in which they can jointly play a role together in Afghanistan, and perhaps take Pakistan on board also, so that it becomes a trilateral Pakistan, India and China together to ensure that Afghanistan's security is maintained and everyone is the gainer through the economic route.
All right. We also have a video message response from Kirti Jayakumar from Chennai, who's the founder of the Building Peace Project. Let's take a look.
One of the things that I think are very important concerning India and Afghan relations in the next couple of years is constant engagement towards peace. It's absolutely imperative that India plays its role as a key player in the region, culminating in the restoration of peace and the rebuilding of society in Afghanistan. Especially since the US troop drawdown is impending and is likely to complete itself within the next year. This is an absolutely important step that has to be taken. I think it's important that Mr. Modi concerns himself with engagement with Afghanistan at all levels, and by all levels I mean everything from hard power in the form of diplomacy and negotiation, culminating in the use of soft power to engage civilians in harmonious exchange with one another with their counterparts between both countries, interacting towards peace.
So Kirti there talking about soft power. Pratap, we were discussing this before we came into the discussion, the fact that Afghanistan is a heavily impoverished country. And I know that India has been providing hidden nutrients, wheat, that kind of aid. But I think the soft power is definitely a game changer when it comes to India and Afghanistan, isn't it?
See, I'll put it, this was another very important aspect where India is missing out the bus, is that India's whole gamut of play in Afghanistan is based on goodwill. Mm-hmm. Now, if that is so is the case, India still does not have an Afghan refugee policy like it has for the Tibetans. And India has generated a huge amount of goodwill in Tibet. We have significant number of Afghan refugees in India. If you see in Delhi, it's full of them.
Absolutely.
And the moment the refugees come in, I'm not talking about those Tajik businessmen we're talking about who go to Dubai and buy malls with CIA money. I'm talking about the impoverished people. When they come into Delhi or Indian cities, they all amalgamate. Whether he's a Pashto, he's a Hazara or a Tajik, it doesn't matter. They all live together in their own little community system. And if India has a refugee policy, the word goes back home that India is a safe haven and India will have more goodwill there and a larger toehold than it has now.
Okay, we've also got a tweet from Beena Sarwar. On what grounds do certain political leaders refer to hashtag Taliban, hashtag Asadis as our people? All those Uzbeks and other foreign fighters, we were referring to that as well. The fact that the foreign fighters is still a factor in certain far-flung areas of Afghanistan. The concern is that even any administration that comes in now really has control over maybe a few urban centers and not really the far-flung areas, and that remains a residual issue.
Well, I can tell you there are a couple of opinions on this, and all depends on where you're getting your inputs. I've met a couple of parliamentary delegations from Afghanistan, people to whom I had to speak through interpreters who probably didn't speak the English language, spoke only Pashtun or whatever. And most of them, those who come from the rural stock, those who are coming from the countryside, continue to believe that the Taliban is still a very important element there, right, and still continues to control, have a degree of control in the countryside. Yet you have a lot of people coming in from the Western world, well-educated, well-heeled, coming in from Stanford and Harvard and places like that, who seem to be totally of the opinion that everything is under control. Mm-hmm. And as soon as the ISAF withdraws, the Afghan National Army and the Afghan security forces are going to establish complete control. Now, the truth lies somewhere in the middle between these two. And you can never put your finger on the pulse in Afghanistan because there are inputs, varying inputs, which will keep coming to you from different. I think my personal assessment, yes, the control in Kabul is good at the moment, and the presence of the ISAF is there. But around the countryside, in areas, it is suspect. At the moment, it is suspect, and a lot will depend on how the experience of the ANA comes forth subsequently, and how they manage to ensure that there is security in those areas.
All right, we are joined by Rajeshwari Krishnamurthy, Research Officer at IPCS. Rajeshwari, can you hear us?
Hi, I can now.
Okay, so Rajeshwari, we were discussing what the Narendra Modi government's approach to Afghanistan would be, and I think the consensus is that Afghanistan is still a very complex geography to work with. It's not easy to read. What, from your perspective or your reading, should be the priorities for this government going forward?
In terms of priorities, there are three sections to it. One is, of course, security. The second one is developmental assistance, and the third one is your economy and education. But very practically speaking, for anything to work in the country, you need their economy to be functioning in a bottom-up model. And Afghanistan has primarily always been an agrarian country. We should invest more in agriculture, if anything. India already started the Agricultural University in Kandahar last year. I think we should initiate more things like those. I think the current government's policy of no boots on the ground is very valid, and they should continue with the same. Putting soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan is a very bad idea. And they continue with developmental assistance. Well, of course, in smaller efforts, not large-scale ones at once, but many small-scale efforts. I mean, together all these eventually will be better for the country and for us as well.
All right. Thank you, Rajeshwari. Pratap, I think, this government's made it very clear, and Narendra Modi said that in the past few days in his speeches. Yesterday, there was a book launch as well, where he talked about agriculture, skill development, aid, and actual, technology and new methods coming in. Afghanistan is a country where clearly there is a huge gap, and there is a potential as well, because we've already seen India exporting wheat to Afghanistan, working with them there. Do you think that could be a good priority area, given the impoverished nature of the country?
See, I just heard what Rajeshwari said, and she's quite bang on target. It is an agrarian country. The farm sector is still not modern. And these are the area, health sector, it's very important.
Education as well.
Education, and then also there's a sector called the war damage sector. There's 10 million landmines lying around that country. There are millions of people without limbs. Now these are the sector India can work a lot. Education sector is one sector India should perhaps not venture too much in right now because of it does not have boots on the ground, because that's where the focus of Taliban is. I mean, this gentleman who was kidnapped was trying to educate people. The Taliban is against the education of women. India should think piecemeal, like the lady said, and fix its priority. Okay. But basically, again, India, Iran, Soviet Union, Russia and the United States have to work together for a bit of stability in their country so that any economic activity can flourish.
All right, Rahul, that's a conundrum, right? I mean, how does India step in and sort of escalate its economic and infrastructural support to Afghanistan, given the security risk? Very quickly, because we're running out of time, what, from your perspective, should be priority areas of the Narendra Modi government vis-a-vis Afghanistan?
I think first priority is very clear. You support the Afghan national security forces. There's no two ways, because unless you have your hard power instruments being very strong in Afghanistan, in Kabul, per se, you cannot, you can invest as much in soft power, you will not be able to succeed. So I would say that you have to focus on supporting the Afghan national security forces first and foremost, so that don't worry about the other issues like Pakistan, etc., but you must support the Afghan national security forces as strongly as possible and build up their capacity, so that after that they create the grounds for soft power elements to be deployed. Your iron mining, etc., transportation, etc., that will come on its own once you have got the hard power instruments available to the Afghan government and the Afghan national security.
Surya, in what nature would this capacity be coming? Because, like you said, your reading is that we still don't have enough of our own to be able to pass on to Afghanistan. Is the Russia model the fact that you're going to provide aid to Afghanistan to buy enough? Because given the fact that Afghanistan is so ill-equipped?
Well, you see, Afghanistan is like a bottomless pit. I mean, their demands this is one way forward with the Russians, where you have a tripartite deal with them. But there's no one way in which all these things can be sorted out. There has to be you work with the Afghans on training their military, you work with the Russians on supplying them some kinds of equipment. But at the end of the day, you need peace and security there, for which regional effort is required. Now, I don't think the Pakistanis want a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan anymore, because that's going to hit them in their own Pashtun areas. So I think within that, there could be space here for some kind of a regional kind of deal, where everybody agrees to keep off meddling in Afghanistan's internal issues, but ensures that all their interests are protected. So that is perhaps the way forward. It's not going to be easy, but perhaps that is the way forward.
All right, Pratap, I think you had a bit of a difference in approach to what Rahul was articulating. He was saying hard power first, then soft power. Do you think it's either or both in tandem?
See, I'll use an old anecdote from Afghanistan. I mean, I remember once President Najibullah and we were having dinner, and he said, "Oh, Pratap, you know something? This war in Afghanistan, nobody will win." The reason is very clear. It's tactically. The moment you give military assistance, you antagonize a segment of people. There are so many different segments, 15 actually. And you take the Mujahideen or the Taliban or whatever, they are not occupation forces, they are the hit-and-run forces. You cannot fight them by giving military assistance. Training and stuff which India is doing is pretty good actually. And half of them are being trained at claws, and General will know more than me. And soft approach generates goodwill, because 60 to 70% of Afghanistan is still in the rural belt, and the military assistance will only antagonize the country against us at one point, even with the change of dispensation.
All right, and last words from you, General HASNAIN. I think from a perspective of what's going to happen going forward, what are the priorities you see for the Narendra Modi government vis-a-vis Afghanistan?
Well, I'll take a cue from what Rahul said, and I'll balance it out. And I'll say there's a thing called military soft power.
Okay.
After all, what we are doing there is military soft power at the moment.
At the moment,
I don't think it is easy to take a decision on actually providing arms and ammunition and things like that and hardware at the moment. At the appropriate time, the decision will be taken. Even you got to remember that if you're providing all this, then it has to be sustained. You got to provide the technology for it.
And like Surya said, it's a bottomless pit when it comes to
No, I would like to remind the General and Rahul that he was very much part of it. In the 1987, when we said Rajiv Gandhi shooting from his hip, send the IPKF, and what happened to them?
Exactly.
Ask them.
Exactly. You see, so...
and an issue of sovereignty as well. I think if we keep going to international forum and talk about sovereignty, like Surya pointed out, I think the sovereignty of Afghanistan has to be safeguarded by a much larger regional and multilateral effort.
It has to be a quilt work of diplomacy, economic forces have to get together. It's not only boot on the ground and military hardware, tanks and...
We could keep discussing this, but thank you so much. We're running out of time. Thank you so much, Pratap. Thank you so much, General HASNAIN. Thank you, Rajeshwari, Surya and Rahul. You can also continue having that discussion on Twitter by tweeting with us at #IndiaPostLive. Thank you very much for watching.